준비가 되셨다면 이 오늘의 컨퍼런스 세 번째 세션인데요. 테마를 먼저 소개해 드리고자 합니다. 세 번째 세션의 주제는요. 이도여치입니다. 어떤 뜻일까요? 세상의 병폐를 예술로서 낫게 한다, 치유하게 한다라는 뜻입니다. 크립토 아트가 지니고 있는 사회 문제 해결로서의 가능성을 볼 수 있는 세션입니다. 크립토 아트는 블록체인 기술을 기반으로 합니다. 이 블록체인에 창작자의 권리와 창작물의 소유권을 기록해서 보호합니다. 그리고 이는 작품을 둘러싼 창작자와 소유자, 컬렉터의 관계를 투명하게 만드는 장점을 갖고 있습니다. 블록체인 네트워크를 통해서 창작물의 가치를 극대화하면서 이전에 갖고 있던 문제를 해결하는 가능성을 크립토 아트는 지니고 있습니다. 이 세 번째 세션에서는 그렇다면 과연 이런 크립토 아트의 가능성과 비전을 어떻게 실현할 것인가를 다양한 연사들을 통해서 만나보겠습니다. 네, 첫 번째 초대드릴 연사를 소개해드리고자 하는데요. 저는 NFT 아트 그 무엇으로도 대체 불가능한 예술이라는 NFT 전문서를 작년에 출판하면서 NFT 아트의 역사를 추적해 왔는데 보통 2021년 비플의 NFT 작품이 크리스테에서 낙찰된 것을 기점으로 알고 계실 테지만 그 이전에도 크립토 아트는 NFT 아트는 이어지고 있었습니다. 바로 그 역사를 추적해 오신 분을 소개해 드리고자 합니다. 이분을 모실 수 있어서 굉장한 영광입니다. 이분은요, 크립토 아트 역사가라는 별칭을 지니신 분이고요. 바로 마틴 루카스 오스타코프스키를 박수로 무대에 모시도록 하겠습니다. 큰 박수 부탁드릴게요. 네, 마틴 루카스 오스타코프스키는 2018년부터 크립토 아트를 창작해온 아티스트입니다. 캐나다를 중심으로 활동하며 크립토 아트에 관한 공동 성명서를 2019년에 발표를 했고요. 그리고 크립토 아트의 역사를 문서화해서 2020년부터 집필을 진행했고요. 크립토 아트 히스토리안, 역사가로 불리고 있습니다. 그럼 마틴 루카스의 특별한 강연을 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
Hello. Hi, thanks a lot for having me. I'm Martin Lukas Ostachowski, or MLO, and before I discovered crypto art, I was a traditional artist and struggling and being really frustrated of how of a linear path the traditional art world was. You know, like everybody has to go through the same narrow pathway from building up a body of work, trying to get into group shows, eventually scoring a solo show, and then find gallery representation before you work yourself through a system of galleries. And when I discovered cryptocurrencies, I quickly noticed that really the exciting part about it is for me less the currency aspect, but really the technology behind it. And I was actively looking for use cases for art. And I quickly discovered while a lot of projects in the field of cryptocurrencies were still theorizing and using or searching for use cases, crypto art and smart contract enabled marketplaces were already fully functional use cases, while everything else was just theory. And that led me down the path of starting crypto art in 2018 and also starting to document the process and the history. A lot of my artistic practice is research based, so I started really trying to document and understand it and capture it. What we're going to talk about today is I want to give you like a very, very brief introduction to the history of crypto art, show you a few of the definitions models I've been working on over the past few years, and then talk about my newest project, which is also research-centric, trying to find the essence of crypto art. So when it comes to the history of crypto art, I always love to start really with the basics and the roots, because I think these are topics which are not necessarily often enough communicated and talked about. And to understand it, you have to understand that the cypherpunks is a huge influence from the value base, because it was a community of cryptography enthusiasts, which were really activists who wanted to promote values like sovereignty, who wanted privacy, who were advocating basically for right of anonymity and core concepts of decentralization, which we find in crypto art until today. And when Bitcoin, basically the position paper by Satoshi Nakamoto was presented to the group of cypherpunks, it really found like a really nurturing ground, and this was even emphasized during the time it launched, because it was during the subprime mortgage crisis, where people got frustrated with the governments and the economy, where the government basically could devaluate their currency and print more. So that was kind of like a very pivotal moment, that it also happened in a moment of crisis. And a lot of these values really cascaded through the time of crypto art and are still embedded, while you still find, for instance, these sentences like bank the unbanked, democratize the art. They derive from the cypherpunk movement, but often these days they are just like lip service, or basically, not even worth the paper they're printed on, because it just sounds attractive. Crypto art was very, very complex in the beginning. So if you think onboarding today is complicated, imagine just how it was 10 years ago, when we didn't have like wallets which were easy to understand or visual. So it also was very hard to excite people about a technology which is so abstract and concept, that the first physical representations of crypto art were really like physical bitcoins. And the idea was really to take a lot of analogies from the physical process of minting currencies and convert them over. So you have stuff like mining, you have terms like minting, just to kind of make this connection between, the physical process of creating and the digital. One of the aspects is that in the early years, even, in its nascent history, there was a lot of like scandal, drama, and fraud. We had like the Silk Road marketplace, which was, taken down by the FBI. We had the Mt. Gox controversy, which was like a huge crypto exchange, which got hacked, and millions disappeared, and how it was handled. So people were not interested in cryptocurrencies. So they were basically looking for identity. And one of the interesting moments in that time was, for instance, the reveal in 2014 by Newsweek, where they falsely accused Dorian Nakamoto to be the creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto. And interestingly, in that time, despite knowing that he's not Satoshi, basically everybody jumped on it, because it was better to have basically a false prophet than none. And this whole concept of identity really continued. And while we saw during the recent years the idea of like these PFP projects and avatars, this is a concept which is not novel to the space, because really, as it started evolving, it started with identity projects such as domain names, such as, ideas and concepts to tokenize some sort of identity and make this space, which was very abstract, to some sort of customize it. And these projects cascaded through, and as you see, it's like a succession of projects which leads to the PFP mania we saw last year, or during the last 2 years. When it comes to tokenization, I think it's important to know, the concept of a blockchain was actually invented up to like 11 years before Bitcoin actually launched. And there was this famous paper by Stewart and Haber, where they basically proposed the idea of verifying and hashing huge data volumes and publicly publishing it as some sort of like an idea. And they created a physical blockchain 10 years before the idea of Bitcoin itself. Later on, the colored coin proposal by Yoni Assia and Minnie Rosenfeld introduced the idea of using Bitcoins to represent actually other values and physical values. And I think that triggered a lot of exploration, which, typically artists are the ones who innovate and think things. So we saw a lot of artists and technologists exploring this idea. And one of the examples I like to give is, for instance, BitDomains, or Ria Meyer, who's like a technologist and artist. She, for instance, tokenized her genome and got in her work Proof of Existence, later Soul. So it was really artists who tried to play this idea of tokenizing other things to the extremes. I think one key takeaway which I would like you to remember is that, crypto art is nothing which happened overnight. It's an incremental succession of ideas, projects, and people who built on top of each other. It didn't happen and just appeared. It's really like a long process. So after we had this initial phase where there was mostly technologists and individual artists working on projects, we saw the emergence of crypto games. And that was the first time basically companies started exploring the space, bringing in the funding, and also bringing the resources to really develop this concept further. After the crypto games, we saw creative communities, and one of the most popular ones is the Rapepe community, because for me it was pivotal in this regard that it was the first time it was not individuals, it was not companies, but actually people voluntarily came together and created something. And one of these ideas was that they created basically the removal of the abstraction. So what they did is they basically accepted submissions from artists, from people who wanted to enter the space, and they made it really very easy to participate because they minted and tokenized these pieces for them. And that was like a huge step forward to, you know, bringing more people in, getting people excited about it. After the creative communities, digital collectibles started to emerge, and I think the importance is because these digital collectibles, such as CryptoKitties and CryptoPunks, really advanced the standards of tokens which we see until today. You know, CryptoKitties became basically, you know, CryptoPunks first became the concept of a hybrid ERC20 standard, and then CryptoKitty introduced the ERC 721, which we use until today on Ethereum Bitcoins. It was also that time that smart contracts really, or the idea of smart contracts really shifted the whole environment away from Bitcoin towards Ethereum, because not only, you know, the idea of smart contracts was very appealing for people to explore, but it was also prohibitively expensive on Bitcoin back then to transact. Interestingly, you know, as Ethereum got popular, we saw the same trend, and these projects moved to other chains and other side chains. After, you know, the digital collectibles came out and artists started exploring it, they felt they didn't feel represented being like on same places like, you know, games and collectibles. So it called really for dedicated art platforms, and this was, you know, initially led by artists. You know, Artoline and Dada were like artist-driven projects which really pushed it forward. And then later it were companies and entrepreneurs which brought this to a different focus, because they again had like the developing capacity and the resources to introduce basically bigger use cases. So, you know, initially it was only JPEGs and GIFs, and later they came like videos and more bigger file sizes. So that really led to a succession and broader operation and exploration of the idea of tokenizing art. And we have also the emergence of the metaverse. And I think the metaverse was also pivotal because it really expanded the use case from basically art and collectible or game-centric elements towards things which are no longer art. There were like, you know, real estates, there were names and other elements which really kind of expanded the way what NFTs were used for. So if we look at the use cases and what NFTs is, I usually like to take a moment to show you a model of definitions I was working on since 2019 and which continuously evolved, because NFTs for me are not art. NFTs for me are basically a simple medium that is defined by its use case, because while in the beginning we had a lot of like art collectibles or artwork, you know, pretty soon in the virtual realm, this was expanded through the metaverses. So we use that like wearables, like digital fashion, we have real estates, names, but also in the physical realm where these NFTs started to represent things like tickets, licenses, certificates, or, you know, other real-world applications like starting to tracking supply chains and other elements. So NFT itself stopped being art because it was becoming a vessel like a CD, a DVD. It really was defined by what it is. Putting that in context, I started to think about like the term of blockchain-related art. And blockchain-related art was basically every art which had to match at least one of these three categories, which means it has to explore blockchain as a theme or subject. It has to use cryptocurrency as a payment. It doesn't seem very innovative or progressive now, but in 2020, a British artist called Lincoln Townley had like this famous traditional auction house auctioning his physical works and only accepting Bitcoin. And that made international use and also advocated the use of cryptocurrency. So even the use of the payment became a potential theme to become blockchain related. And the last thing was basically using blockchain for provenance. If you kind of want to put it in a bigger context, we have an area which is blockchain related art. And whenever that basically overlaps with digital art, it became for me crypto art. And here, again, it's important to see that NFTs are just a subset of crypto art and not synonymous to be used, because since the expansion of the use case of NFT, a lot of NFTs that are created today have nothing to do with art anymore. If you want to kind of categorize it further, I always like to think of crypto art, something which is conceptually fused to the blockchain. And this can be done in 3 ways. You can use, for instance, smart contracts, like, there was a project by Rhea Myers, which was called Is Art, where she basically created a smart contract, and you can trigger a transaction, and you would define for yourself, is this an artwork or not? So that was like very conceptual, and it has nothing to do with some sort of token. And yet it is like, digital, conceptually fused to the blockchain. There's the whole range of fungible tokens, which, a lot of collectibles fall into. And these are, if you're unfamiliar with the term fungible, think of art prints. If you print an artwork and you create 1,000 copies, they're not numbered, they're not signed, all of them are the same. So this is the term fungibility. If you start signing them and numbering them, you create them unique identifiers. And this is how a fungible token turns then into really an NFT, a non-fungible token. And to be very precise, a non-fungible art token if it's an artwork. So while I was working a lot on these technical definitions, I started realizing, while it captures a lot of these questions of what it is and how it can be categorized, it did not include necessarily the intrinsic values or the motivation or the spirit behind it. So I started basically a new research-centered project, which is really looking for the essence of crypto art. And what really motivated this was that in 2021, after this pivotal 69 million sales, it was like opening the floodgates. We grew way too fast. We were not able to really establish and communicate any sorts of values and promote and educate people, such things as like empowering the artist, really creating like, sustainable income for artists, or even, promoting artist self-sovereignty and independence and removing the gatekeepers. So this whole attention and, this record-breaking sale attracted a lot of people in the space, like venture capitalists, like Web2 entrepreneurs and influencers, which really poured into the space, and they really had no interest and disregard basically for the standards and achievements this space already created. And this is, of course, very disappointing, because obviously as they grew in the space, the missions and objectives changed. For instance, a venture capital fund investing in a marketplace, suddenly the initial motives, as intrinsic it might have been, now they have to report to a board, they have to meet numbers, so the focus shifts away from what it was actually about. And you have, a lot of artists who see that as a potential escape from this traditional art path and are looking for ways to selling their art. So in their desperation, they're accepting conditions which are not necessarily, desirable for the space we wanted to create. About 2021 was also the time when we saw the term NFT art and NFT artist emerge, because a lot of crypto artists wanted to differentiate themselves from NFTs, because they said, like, all the NFT artists, they really don't care about our values, they really don't care what it is about for us, so we need to kind of differentiate ourselves of people who are just using it as a medium. And this is why we see, actively this term NFT artists, while a lot of crypto artists don't call themselves like that until today. So in this approach to really look for the essence, I started making one-on-one interviews with as many crypto artists as I can, which I want to expand in a second step to also collectors and curators, and really try to analyze and find out, do these values change, for instance, by the year you joined the space? Do the focus shifts, and how do these values basically develop over time? And the objectives are really to create some sort of like, a reliable resource for people to look at, which is pluralistic, which is not basically just defined by one person creating a manifesto, but is really to capturing a broad amount of people who are in the space, who created the space, and trying to find some common ground and to create a testament to the movement, really, which is defined by its creators and not by people from outside. And this is really the objective, to create kind of like a definition which is based on these shared values, to have something which people can rally for if they're new into the space. While it is a little bit early to show you the research, because I have this internal objective to survey several hundred crypto artists before I come up with that, there were a few things which already stood out when I started this project. There were like things which crypto artists really, really deeply cared for the space and were very passionate about what is happening right now. They really embraced the idea of community, over necessarily the individualism, because as a community we came together and achieved things such like establishing royalty standards. And I think this is something which we seem right now to get lost, because people think a lot more individualistically than thinking as a group and as a collective. While our strength is in numbers, because when people came together and decided, okay, if we want to continue as a platform, we want you to establish this 10% royalties, all of the platforms complied within several months, because the mass of people was just there saying them, this is what we want, this is what we can achieve, and all of them fall in place. But if we basically approach it individually, it's much harder. I remember I was working on one project with a marketplace. They wanted to collaborate on a piece. And I said, I cannot collaborate with you until you establish royalties. And much to my surprise, they said, okay, we're going to introduce royalties. Now, I'm not a very prolific artist, but if I alone can change basically a marketplace to do something which I think is better for the space, imagine the power we would have if we would all decide to do something like that. One element which is, I think, which also comes out a lot in these elements which people fear about is decentralization, one of the core ideas of having basically choice, because what we see right now is we see a lot of venture capitalism and we see a lot of consolidation, and this is really the opposite of what we want. And when I say venture capital, I'm not talking about like venture capital investing in art, because that pays artists, but I'm talking about venture capital which is investing in critical crypto art infrastructure, such as marketplaces, such as metaverse, such as creating tool sets for artists to create work. Because why is it dangerous? To me, it feels like it's the cancer of crypto art. What do I mean with that? This is basically infiltrating the system. It is trying to grow as rapidly as it can, and it's trying to kill it. Because as we see right now in this bear market, a lot of marketplaces are struggling, and these venture capital companies which are in this infrastructure, they're having a field day. And why is that? Because they see their competition disappear. So what is happening right now is, and this is why we need to be aware of it, is they are growing for market share. And the more market share they have, the more dangerous it is. Because think about it, if they can control where you sell it and how you sell it, they can regulate access. If they can control who's exhibited, they become tastemakers. And if they have the power consolidated, they're creating basically a power structure which we initially wanted to disrupt. While it's still at an early stage, and I hope to have more results in a year or two, because it's a long-term project, I think where we're headed right now is we've been in a very boring place during the last few years, because crypto art was so much more interesting. We had projects which are using your breath or the pressure of your butt basically to create art. We had projects which had like social and environmental impact. We had, Bail Block, which used basically an app which would mint Monero tokens, which would finance bails for immigrants. We had Harvest, which was a project by Julian Oliver, which would use regenerative energy to fund environmental studies. These are like, projects which are just so much broader than we see in this NFT bubble which we are now, which I like to see like as an eye of the tornado. We had a lot of disruption, exploration at the beginning, but right now we're on the whole of this tornado where everything looks the same, where everything doesn't necessarily advance in the same way. But as it is with the tornado, you also exit the eye, and I think now that everything is kind of homogeneous, it will really foster again innovation, because that is what drives saturation usually, because in order to stand out, you're going to have to innovate again. So to sum it up, and if I didn't lose you yet, I have 2 walls there in the corner, which I explore the history a little bit more in detail, and some more definitions. And something just for you to think about is, for me, really the common denominator of crypto art, it's a movement of values and not aesthetics. And if you think about the whole idea of decentralization and how crypto art is right now under attack from venture capital, is our most powerful weapon is really choice. Choice as a community, individually, what we want to do, with whom we want to partner, but also choice to come together as a community and define the standards we want to space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your valuable speech, Martin. Very insightful presentation. 질의응답을 하나 정도 받아보고자 합니다. 질문이 있으신 분은 손을 들어주시면 마틴과 직접 소통할 수 있는 시간을 드리고자 하고요. 궁금하신 사항, 간단한 질문도 좋습니다. 코멘트 하셔도 좋고요. 손을 자유롭게 들어주시면 좋겠습니다.
We're taking a few questions if you want.
네. 특별히 우리 마틴 루카스가 청중분들과 소통하는 상호작용하는 시간을 갖기를 원하셔서요. 모든 세션에만 있지는 않고 이 시간에만 하려고 하는데요. 또 우리 한국인 분들은 제가 눈을 마주치면 살짝 이렇게 피하고 부끄러워하시는 경향이 있는데 마틴 루카스가 이야기하신 네. 지금 영어로 이제 만나노 로이스가 질문을 해줄 거고요. 바로 소통이 될 것이고 여러분은 동시 통역기를 통해서도 답변을 들으실 수 있습니다. 네, 질문해 주시죠.
Thank you. So first of all, it's always incredible to see this amount of research being done and how you decided to do it on putting the perspective on the inside of the community rather than outside critical eye. So praise for that. One thing that I'm usually always trying to shift the attention to when we talk about crypto art, I really liked what you said about the fact that it's art that becomes almost self-aware of the technology. But then when the technology has certain topics that it touches upon, like the fact of becoming independent from certain central powers, and this implies that there's a lot to build. These communities have to become active, proactive, and so it almost sounds like social activism. Does this mean that with crypto art, we're moving to a form of art that shifts maybe from just the visuals and thanks to smart contracts and the entire infrastructure of the blockchain, it can also become a completely new form of art that perhaps we have not explored before, which is literally ecosystemic building, which is almost like community-owned businesses, which we saw a little bit with PFPs. I find that fascinating. I would love to hear more if this is an understanding that you share.
Yeah, I think, it's just natural because if you think about the development of the space, one of the recurrent theme was really activism for blockchain. And what does it mean? Is like, actively promoting ideas like freedom, self-sovereignty, and, really decentralizing power, right? And I think if that is not the birth-giving ground for some sort of activism, I don't know what else. And I think it's just natural that it evolves because this is the nature of art and the nature of technology, right? I like to see right now we're at the stage of NFT 1.0 because we already know there's a lot of flaws in this technology, right? We have like the problem with storage, we have the problem with like, technical, the sustaining of artwork, which for instance, if a platform no longer exists. So we're going to evolve to a different standard. And I think as such, we're going to also see it broadening up the way we can make art with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. 네, 큰 박수 부탁드리도록 하겠습니다. 혹시 시간이 가능하다면 한국인 분들 중에서도 마틴과 이야기 나눌 수 있는 시간을 좀 마련해보면 좋을 것 같아요. 질문 한번 해보실 분 계실까요? 코멘트도 좋습니다. 손을 네, 에드워드 지코가 네 바로 질문해 주기 바랍니다.
Hi there. I guess my question is, do you have a thought or an example in mind of what your ideal marketplace would look like?
Absolutely, it's artist-driven. It's
Yeah.
artist-driven, it's artist-led, it is refraining from seeking the growth through venture capital. Because I think it has to sort of, in order to be driven by values, it has to be dictated by the people who are at all ends in the chain of decision-making, in the chain of receiving, in the chain of making this environment. So I think for me, I really like, ideas and concepts. Like I already mentioned Dada. I like Sovereign. These are like the projects which really have like a lot of heart and soul, led by artists, for artists, and who are trying to change it for artists and not necessarily meeting quarterly objectives.
Does your ideal marketplace have curation at the center of it, or does it allow for centralized, even decentralized pockets of curation? But is it open or is it closed? I guess is the question.
That's a good question. I think, when it comes to curation, the access to it should be open. But what it's done with it can be defined by the community. I think right now we see a lot of curation done by corporations posing as individuals, or corporations which have extreme marketing backgrounds, which have really literally no background in art, but are exceptional marketeers, have exceptional resources to become really like such a big audience that they can make the decision. So I think I like to see these marketplaces driven by artists collaborating with real curators who have like this knowledge and care for the space, and really try to bring the worlds together, you know, and not necessarily define who is the new artist driven on metrics.
네, 감사합니다. 저희 그러면 더 대화를 나눠보고 싶긴 한데, 저도 실은 질문하고 싶은 게 굉장히 많긴 한데 다음 순서가 기다리고 있기 때문에 우리 크립토 아트의 역사에 대해서 전해주신 마티 루카스 블로그에 들어가시면 그가 크립토 아트의 연대기에 대해 적어놓은 글을 마음껏 보실 수가 있으니 참고해 주시고요. 박수로 네, 감사의 마음을 전했으면 좋겠습니다. 네, Thank you, Marty. 실은 어디서도 들어볼 수 없는 이야기였던 것 같아요. 굉장히 귀중한 시간이었다는 생각이 들고요. 이어지는 순서는요, 크립토 아트의 새벽이라는 주제로 크립토 아트 움직임의 최전선에 있는 패널 분들이 등장하십니다. 도대체 크립토 아트는 어떻게 탄생했는지, 또 이 크립토 아트는 커뮤니티가 굉장히 중요한 핵심 키워드인데요. 이 커뮤니티 형성에 관한 경험과 통찰을 전해주실 겁니다. 패널 토론의 좌장은요, 프로프의 일라인 샤이먼이며, 뮤지엄 오브 크립토 아트의 콜본 벨, 버티컬의 미콜 앱, 다다의 주디 맴이 패널로 토론에 참여합니다. 모두 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다. Let us invite them in the stage with a big round of applause.
Okay, we have an amazing panel, an amazing discussion today. First, it's really an honor to be here. This is my first time in Korea, first time in Seoul. Absolutely beautiful. Have loved the last couple of days. So really an honor to be here. And you know, as I said, we have these three amazing folks on stage. There is so much happening in the space, in the crypto art world at the moment. These three really have this purview on what's happened over the last number of years in a way that many do not, including myself. So I'm excited to learn. The goal here is to take some of those learnings from those early days, those themes, those ideals that really brought all three of you into this space, and see how we can unpack those in a way that makes sense today and looking ahead for this space. What does that mean as we do look ahead? So we have Colborn here from the Museum of Crypto Art. Great to have you. Micol from Vertical Crypto Art, and Judy from Data. I was here last night and saw your talk. It was outstanding. So let's kick it off. As I said, I want to start with a little context, Colborn, and I'm going to kick it to you. I think there were sort of these three dimensions that you described crypto art through, and let me just pull them up here quickly. It is, I'll pull it up here. Individual sovereignty is number one, market access, and freedom of expression. I'm curious, how do those three manifest in a visual aesthetic that you call crypto art, number one? And then two, why are those three dimensions so fundamental?
Yeah, you have to go back to what Martin said. There really is no unified visual aesthetic of crypto art, right? This is self-sovereignty, this is self-expression, this is freedom at its most. And however that is manifested into the symbols are, I guess, iconography that we're relating to. For me, that's crypto art. So it really is just, what does it mean to tap into one center, be it anywhere in the world, and have a unique self-expression for that moment in time.
Got it. And I'm going to kick it back to you just for another moment. Can you unpack those three dimensions? Why are those three so fundamental?
It's a lot of paralleling in the contemporary art world of what happened to the traditional finance world with the invention of crypto. So self-sovereignty, a return to you being the custodian of your money, you being the arbiter of what happens to your art. Accessibility, removal of the financial means of production from the government and and you taking back the artistic means of expression. What was the third?
The third is we have freedom of expression, market access, and individual sovereignty.
And market access. Is that what I missed?
No, I mean, I think you touched on that one as well, Colborn. Micol, I'd be curious to kick it to you. You know, in terms of this notion of sovereignty, and Martin just mentioned it on the curatorial side, you know, one of the promises that I sort of think of in crypto art is the removal of intermediaries, right? And a decentralized world where curation happens at scale and not through a couple gatekeepers. You are a curator at Vertical Crypto Art. That is one of the roles you play. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I actually don't think that the vision of crypto art is to remove the gatekeeper. I think it's to re-envision what a curator is and reinvent the role of a curator in a way that it feeds into the ethos and kind of ideals of this new ecosystem. There's not a like pre-definite meaning of what a curator is, but if you actually go back to like the meaning of the word, which means in Italian, I'm Italian, it means curare, so it means taking care of. And I think for me, what I do in my life, and every day with Vertical is taking care of the whole kind of like process of not only, placing an artwork in an exhibition, but really like taking time to have a relationship with each and every artist that we work with, have a friendship, have a partnership, understand their process, where they want to go. And the role of a curator in Web3 and crypto art is to, for me, open doors that maybe are not yet opened, to also like define what crypto art is to worlds that do not understand it, and to keep in mind this idea of self-sovereignty and this concept of freedom of expression in the way that we curate.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And Judy, I'm curious, Micol mentioned this notion of communicating crypto art to new audiences. I think for me, there's this thing that happens that, when you try to broaden awareness of something that's inherently disruptive and has these ideals that we're talking about, you can do some version of gentrifying those or losing that essence. I heard you speak last night about data being at the Tate Modern, so you're certainly interacting with these different audiences. Talk about keeping those ideals while sort of being thoughtful about mass adoption and new audiences.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of like at the dawn of crypto art, we would think about mass adoption. And I think it's really, really hard to convey what crypto art is unless kind of people try it, like they dip their toes into it. I think now there's more knowledge about NFTs, for better or worse. People have heard. I saw like the difference 6 months apart. I was in Mexico City. 6 months before I would say NFT, people would go, and then 6 months later, after people or whatever, people had read about it. But still, the process for decentralized things, for buying the cryptocurrency that will allow you to collect or participate is very different from what people are used to. So I always tell people, in my experience, the best way to explain it is to do it, or to start exploring, and maybe not spending, but go and see platforms, whether it's Object or whatever platform is out there that exhibits crypto art, or whether you wanna with 01 now or whatever, for people to experience it. And we are not that concerned about mass adoption any longer, but it's really an ethos in a way, the ethos of you're your own custodian, the ethos of it's peer-to-peer. It is really a different mindset when we are used for like big corporations to always holding, our stuff together. And here you have to tell a person, this wallet, if you lose the keys, that's gone. Or you have to understand that you have the agency to maybe sell your own art or do. This requires a mind shift, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned large corporations and their role or not in this world. I'm curious on the institution side, and maybe Colborn, I'll kick it back to you. I mean, the Museum of Crypto Art is this digitally native, crypto native institution, but yet in the space at the moment, I think we're seeing many artists appeal to traditional institutions as this check mark in their career, in their progression, both at the auction house level and the museum institution level. I'm curious, what's the role for a crypto native institution relative to perhaps some of those traditional institutions?
Yeah. The Museum of Crypto Art, I always say, is a museum unbecoming. It's basically what would happen if artists took over and ran the institution themselves. The institutions that you talk about are top-down structures, right? There's people at the top deciding what is important, and they're putting those in, the purview of the public for reasons that are their own, and those are their stakeholders. So what happens if we invert the power structure, if we begin to look at what it means for artists to be the curators, artists to be the decision makers, so that they can speak on the ground up for the art itself, as opposed to whatever other factors go into that one individual's decision to include somebody in their canon.
Yeah. Micol, any thoughts on that? I mean, again, I'm of two minds personally in terms of the way that we and artists and collectors and platforms like Proof interact with these entrenched institutions for the reasons you mentioned, Colborn. Any thoughts there?
I think everybody's interacting with these institutions. Like the museum is interacting with these institutions. We are, you are, Judy is, like, to a certain extent, everyone is. I think what is important, or what like artists are really looking for, is validation, which I think is something that we shouldn't really be looking for, because the validation has to come from within. And the idea to be able to like seek validation from like traditional institutions, I think, is where the kind of the line is a little bit broken. And in order to kind of keep this ideology of crypto art and decentralization, of all of these values that we've been talking about over the last 2 days, these new institutions have to come from within. And so validation shouldn't be sought from the outside, but it just come and be nurtured from the inside. And that is what I think kind of changes around things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Judy, I want to send it back to you on the marketplace side. And Martin just touched on it in the question that he answered. What does a crypto native marketplace, an ideal version of that, look like to you, perhaps?
Well, we did ours many years ago in 2017. It was based on the CryptoPunk smart contract, and what we loved about what they did was this beautiful, like, self-running marketplace that was autonomous. I mean, that to me in itself is kind of a work of art. And so that's what it is, like a place where you go to acquire and to collect, that is separate from the art making in our case, because we have a platform where people make art. And I am not like a purist about centralization or decentralization, but I think the beautiful thing about blockchain is that it allows to have a kind of like a marketplace that runs by itself, where you purchase something. If you have royalties, they supposedly automatically go to the artist, and the people can trade, and people can gift, and people can buy and sell. And it's really, I don't think that there should be more than that. And hopefully it can run kind of independently without, like Martin was saying, like VC capital, or, the entire point, I think, of blockchain was you didn't have to go through the pain of VC funding. And here we are. But that's what I guess it would look like. And this is what it looks like to us.
Yeah, I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'm curious, on the display of digital and crypto art, I think you've all sort of played different roles in thinking through how best to do that. Micol, of course, you've done lots of physical instantiations of exhibitions. Judy, you've shown work in different ways. Colborn, of course. How do you think about sort of the digital relative to physical expression of, instantiation of digital, fundamentally digital crypto art?
Yeah, I mean, like this screen is pretty cool, but for me in 2020, it was always about digital art in digital environments. And that meant displaying this work inside metaverse spaces. And for me, it was powerful and evocative and transformative when I was stepping into virtual reality and I was fully immersed in the art. We were in 2021 throughout incredibly regressive to try to bring this work into physical spaces by putting them on television screens. It doesn't work. You have already like extremely negative connotations with television being the medium in which you are viewing this, as opposed to a full 360 immersive environment that is transformative, that is imaginative, and TV traditionally is, of course, something people just kind of shut their brains off to.
I think there's a place for both. Personally, what we try and do is actually to bring in like the audience and interactivity when we actually show the work, and try to allow people to like understand what lays behind the actual technology or the work that they're seeing, which leads into also like an explanation around like blockchain and smart contracts and NFT. So it's not just a simple like passive viewing, but actually there's more like, it's more of like an active viewing. So live minting or like audiovisual works, a lot of like this idea of allowing people to like interact with the technology itself, and not just placing like a JPEG on a screen, which again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just not something that we usually tend to do.
We have experimented with everything, and just in our retrospective in Milan, we did, actually this is an excerpt of, we had an immersive room, which was a physical immersive room, and we created this piece particularly for that, and it had like a sculptural element. So I think, again, the sky's the limit when it comes to the interaction, but many of our artists really kind of miss working with their hands. So whenever there's an opportunity, they also do like completely physical installations. And art is art, and artists will art, right? So for us, we've done like for the HNFT, for the Historic NFT Festival, we did this NFT where you actually go into the NFT and it's an exhibition of early works. We can do virtual reality, we can do immersive rooms. And if there's no other choice but then to show stuff on a screen, as long as it looks beautiful, it pops out, the resolution is great, and the room is dark, that's what we can, the best we can hope for, right? But maybe there will be also ways, like more innovation in terms of how these things are displayed in a way that doesn't feel like you're looking at like a TV screen. I agree with Colborn on that.
Yeah, that made sense to me. Micol, I'm curious, I mean, you come from a technology background, you were at Meta. To Judy's point, do you see some AR, VR version of the metaverse that becomes the de facto place to engage with crypto art?
I think from my perspective, like VR is still very far away from being accessible to the normal like person. We've done exhibitions in the so-called metaverse, but the way to be able to allow people to actually see these exhibitions is to make them accessible. And the fact that you have to put a headset on already is a massive barrier for like, I would say 80% of like the world, if not even more. And realistically, like, going back to like this idea of like curation, when you talk about like, how do you want your work to be shown? Like the first question to ask this person is the artist. They know. They have in their mind a lot of the times when they're creating or when you're creating with them and telling them, we're doing an exhibition at XYZ, already the creation process has that exhibition in mind, like Judy was saying, so it's a conversation again. Like I think it's wrong to say because it's crypto art, it just has to be shown in digital worlds. Like, why?
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's smart and right in my opinion. I mean, that's true as the demographic of artists changes too, right? I mean, the artists who were creating maybe in 2017, 18 before want their work shown in perhaps, and I'm generalizing based on demographic, but that might not be true. But the artists in 10, 15 years from now will probably expect to show their work in very different ways. Doubling down on that point, how has the artist demographic and their ideals, and when we're speaking in general terms, I'll go with that, how has it changed in the last, let's call it 4 years? And I ask because I'm curious for new artists, and Micol, you have your emerging artist residency programs. Are they thinking about those ideals in the same ways? Are those totally foreign to a 20-year-old artist who's playing around with NFTs? What can you say about that?
Well, one of the goals of the residency is actually to talk about these ideals and these values. And that's why, we bring in Dada, we bring in Martin, we bring in Art Gnome, we bring in like the museum. There's a lot of touch points for this residency program to bring back artists that might be new to the ecosystem into what are, the values of crypto art. So we really strive to keep them alive. In terms of demographics or like, who are the artists that are coming in, I think it's mixed, it's varied. Like I wouldn't even say it's like young artists, we actually get, a lot of like kind of like older, artists. I think obviously with generative art having this massive boom, we've seen quite a lot of like creative coders and, in the world of like this like mix between technologists and artists. But then again, like a lot of writers, a lot of poets, a lot of text-based work is becoming more and more kind of popular, even with the verse. So it's mixed, and it's great that it is. Like musicians, there's so much variety, which is beautiful to see, to be honest.
I think it's interesting because I recently got a call from a quite well-known artist in Mexico City who is 89 years old. And somebody had told him, you have to do NFTs. And maybe you should talk to Judy. And I'm like, oh boy. Because there's the kind of people who have heard about, they don't really know it's not even onboarding, like the getting, it doesn't matter how old you are, getting to that mindset that we're talking about takes some time. I think that, to me, if it's not for you, it's not for you kind of thing. Some artists gravitate because they immediately understand the possibility of this supposed independence that they may have, or getting a whole new set of collectors that they couldn't possibly. And some artists just don't see how their art or their relationships translate into this world. So I think you have to be kind of already kind of predisposed towards the ethos of the technology,
Yeah, that makes sense. Colborn, I was sort of unpacking that point a little bit. I want to talk about 01. This is a new initiative of yours. I think that's fair to say, quite new. And maybe starting with this conversation around who is showing up, who's participating, but then maybe give the audience a little context on also the what 01 is.
Yeah, 01 is a reaction to the 3.5 years that I spent on the museum. And that was a deeply philosophical, that was a deeply technical, that was a arts and curation focused platform and project. And 01 was, how do we make something incredibly simple, incredibly accessible, and inclusive? And that is, we pay all the costs for creators to mint. We pay all the costs for collectors to collect. Everything released is available to be collected for free. There's no money. It takes 2 seconds, really takes a minute to sign up. You can sign up with email, phone number, Google, Facebook, Discord.
Or
Twitter.
MetaMask.
Or MetaMask, yes, you can use the MetaMask. But our goal was really to just say, the space is too small, the space is too exclusive. We use terms that drive most people away. So let's open the doors as wide as possible and make it as easy as possible for people to access it. And it seems to be resonating.
It's so interesting because this goes back to that question around sort of broadening the audience and wider adoption. You are bringing forward those ideals we talked about at the very beginning, I think in many ways with 01, which is interesting. Talk about just for a moment, so the audience knows, the mechanic where if you mint, you can then collect.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the early days of crypto art in which the artists were themselves the curators, right? And I would look to the artist to see who they thought was doing good technical work and who was pushing boundaries and limits, because I had no idea about what any of it meant or what was really interesting. So I was learning from them. The problem is a bunch of influencers, a lot of money came in, took over the space, and the market became the message instead of what the artists were indicating and choosing. So this is really just a return to say, you don't need money to participate. You don't need influence to participate. This is just your art. We'll pay to host it. We'll pay everything for people to get it up there. And then, the only threshold that you need to be on there is to create and to attach this digital immutable object to your name. And that gives you the license to then come into what could effectively be a wall of graffiti and begin to pick and choose what you like.
Yeah, it's an incredibly fascinating, I don't want to undersell it, but experiment at the moment, at least, perhaps. Judy, Micol, any thoughts on sort of that the 0-1 approach to artists creating work, distributing work, collecting? I'd be so curious.
It reminds me a little bit of us, because one, I've actually minted some pieces and I've collected some pieces, and I think it's a delightful experience. There's something about the freedom to collect without money that is really kind of wonderful, but also discovery, because you really kind of discover. But what reminds me a little bit of Dada is this idea that in Dada also you need to earn the right to reply to a conversation, and here you need to mint in order to collect. There's a kind of like a nice give and take there's something about it that requires a bit of effort, that requires a bit of thinking. And to me, like, the more we've always preached for the abundance of art, not for the like the scarcity. More art, the better. So, I'm down with that.
Yeah, it reminds me of Hic et Nunc. If people remember, like the early days of Tezos, Hic et Nunc, started very much as a free or very cheap kind of like open minting page and platform, and people were just trading and sharing. The mechanics of you need to like create to collect are slightly different, but this idea of like free sharing of art and abundance of art is one that I completely agree with. I do think that there's always a piece to this, which is part of like this kind of wider problem that is the attention economy. For people to know that you are somewhere, that you are minting, that you are there, you still need to post on Twitter. You still need to, have those X amount of followers to be able to actually see who you are, or for anybody to know that you're on there. So there is that kind of like, which is obviously a much wider problem, that is this idea of social bar attention economy that is how we live in crypto art and web-free art.
Yeah, I'll just say, what I did was I supercharged the thing that brought me into the space in 2017, which was the additional app, right? So in 20 days, 4,500 users, 125,000 artworks, of which almost it's 49% have been collected. That's like astounding. It's like astronomical. And I know there's stories of, a woman in Egypt reached out to me. She said, my family, my mother, my sister have never been able to collect my work. Now they have the ability to access it and collect it with their email address. Like, thank you so much. And for me, that's just incredible, because that's speaking. And I knew when my mother could mint, when, my co-founder Ludovica, her parents could mint and collect, and they're on there from day one, and they're excited, and they're telling their friends, and it's just fun and fascinating and experiment. We'll see where it goes. Hopefully it just is a little bit of a breadcrumb that takes people away from this liking mechanism into, and away from like rent seeking and platforms like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, into actual ownership of their content, where people who are vested in their journey can keep that with them.
So very quick anecdote. You mentioned the additional app. Dmitry Cherniak, the amazing generative artist, minted work there, I think as early as 2019. I was fortunate to find a couple of those and collect those not that long afterwards. Just as we wrap up here, I'd be so curious to sort of go down the line perhaps, and I maybe know, Colborn, for you, because 0-1's so top of mind, but what is keeping you most energized about the future of crypto art, and how do you see those ideals manifesting today and as we look ahead?
Look, it's the artists, right? And it's the fall from all of this structure and expectation. As Martin said, we're like in the eye of the storm, right? And suddenly it's almost like anything goes again. So people are getting wild, they're getting creative, they're getting free. Everybody's broke, everybody's struggling. And that's, you know, it's almost freeing. You have to go through the pain to like come out and emerge on the other side, but we're going to do it. And these systems and these rides will be bumpy. We've passed the first wave. I've been in crypto almost 7 years now. I felt it all before. I know how this goes. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
I think it's kind of echoing a little bit, but it's the creation of a new culture that is mixed between technology and art. And it's this really like interesting kind of like mix that it's not just artists, but also technologists, you know, this idea of like developers that are building these smart contracts and this base to as to where we are kind of, you know, drawing into. That's extremely interesting to me. And the more we know, we see around in the world, the more technology plays such an important part in everything we do. So we are kind of shaping this new culture that is being shaped by technologists and by creators and artists. And it's exciting.
I think we're still at the dawn because even though it's been 7 years, I mean, imagine it's so early, right? So to us in Dada, it's the invisible economy. It's like we got into blockchain because we could see the obvious like usefulness of being able to convert this value into digital assets, but also to create an alternative system so that artists could create art and get remunerated from their art without having to go through the pain of marketing it. And we are working on this system, and I think the technology can help us automate it or create the systems in which we can distribute the stuff. So that's what we're building. And again, it's about the artists, and it's about giving them the opportunity to have the agency, but also for there to be a more level playing field.
Yeah, I love that. Such a good way to wrap up, and I appreciate all the work you three are doing for the space, for crypto art. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We truly appreciate this meaningful session. Give them a big round of applause. 그 다음 세션은요, 아주 뜨거운 패널 토론이 마련되어 있습니다. 크립토 아트는요, 특유의 문화가 있습니다. 커뮤니티가 있고요. 국경을 초월해서 서로 연결되는 그런 다양한 사람들이 모이는 장이 크립토 아트 씬입니다. 바로 그 크립토 아트 문화와 예술에 대해서 이야기해줄 프루프 커뮤니티의 샘 겔먼과 일라이 샤인먼이 등장해서 오늘 모더레이터 좌장을 맡아주실 거고요. 데이브 크루먼과 레드그래프 NFT가 패널로 토론에 참여한다고 합니다. 소개는 한번 직접 들어보시죠.
Thank you very much. This is actually a very exciting panel to have here because we have three people at very different angles in the art space. We have Eli, who has curated a lot of shows, a lot of drops in the NFT space with really all the best artists in the space, ranging from Snowfro to Tyler Hobbs to Dave Krugman. Have you been a Grails artist yet? Not yet. Not yet. All right. Well, hopefully Dave Krugman soon. We have Dave Krugman, who is definitely one of the most innovative artists in the space right now. Even in the bear market, has found ways to surprise and delight and get people to pay for his art, and it's pretty incredible. And then Benny over there is one of the early. Just one of the early collectors of Sam Spratt and a lot of the top artists in the space, and I'd say one of the top collectors in the space. So, what I'm curious about is what did you think when you first rewind 2 years ago? What was the promise of this space? And then I want to follow up afterwards with where has that promise fallen short? But I'm curious, what would you say going back 2 years is what you saw as the promise of the NFT space and digital art?
I actually collected Dave Krugman's first piece he ever minted on blockchain.
Ever.
And I promised him nothing. I told him that I was going to collect it and I was going to hold it, and that was my only promise. I mean, I think that when it first started, when I remember a while back, I think it was just fun. We were just collecting. It's like CryptoKitties was out, and what it was like, oh, I want to get that because a bunch of us had been in crypto for years and had just a ton of decent amount of ether left over to like just spend on stuff, because at the time ether dropped to like, I don't know, it was like $200, $300, so like we didn't really care. And then I think early on it was really just about this experimental sort of like experience and putting art on chain. And at the time, people have to remember that like the blockchain did nothing literally except pump and dump Bitcoin and other coins. And once you were able to actually mint something on Ether, which was art, it gave it some kind of purpose. And I think that that's sort of like where it started. And then I think it kind of unfortunately took this turn, as Colborn was saying. There was big whales and people who decided to utilize NFTs as, I would say pretty much, coins that just had pictures at that point to just get the value up. And then it kind of sucked off out of every energy of all the art and what we were doing.
Same question. Yeah, so I'm somebody that has always made their living on the bleeding edge of the internet. It used to be social media for me, where I would basically convert attention into USD through an extremely inefficient, agency-based exchange, where I would basically get 5% maximum of the value that I was creating in my online communities, and actually started a kind of creative community called All Ships, like all ships rise with the tide, as a place to kind of escape from the attention economy of Web 2 spaces. And about 6 months after I started this editorial site where I could slow down and tell longer stories, I discovered NFTs and blockchain and crypto art technologies. And to me, this was a way for me to, I kind of had this intuition that what an NFT was, like a digital object, was a capture mechanism for that community capital that I had been kind of exchanging to advertising agencies for so long. So I was like, this is a way for me to do so much more with so much less in terms of attention. And the promise that it played out for me was like, I think I can do more with 1,000 collectors than 10 million followers. And so what crypto art has done for me is it's delineated between audience and community. And I think this is the first time in my life where I have like a real, like true community, because there's people that hold tokens that represent their participation and investment in my creative future. And so that promise I think has held true. And what this kind of dip in this bear market have revealed, it's like when the tide goes out, all the things that are left that I see are the things that I was originally here for. And when all the froth and stuff is gone, it's a lot easier to make those really key connections, those one-on-one relationships that can really change your life as an artist.
I want to add to that because I think it's really important. So we call it crypto art, digital art, whatever you want to call it, but that one-to-one sort of relationship. My wife has a master's in art history, so she's the one who got me into art, 10 years ago. And we always talk about how there's never been really a time in the history of art where you would actually be able to connect to an artist directly like there is right now, right? If you bought a piece of art back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you probably never met the artist that you bought it from, even the 90s. Now with, blockchain and technology and the fact that I could mint Dave's piece and now we're close friends, my whole life has changed and I could mint from artists and buy their pieces and have dinner with them. I mean, that's, to me, changes the whole dynamic of the way that you collect art.
Do you think you could have done that though with a Web 2 artist? Or Web 2 is the wrong word, but with a traditional artist, you buy their piece
somewhat.
and then buy more?
When I started collecting Web 2 art, when I was collecting art off of Instagram like 8-9 years ago, let's say, I had that connection, but it still wasn't as much as the connection when it came to this, because there's the community aspect that Dave is talking about that just was not there in the art space at all.
Just a quick sentence on this. I don't want to dwell too long, but what's really interesting about this particular art movement, which I think is very much here to stay, is that the social landscape and the technology landscape are completely intertwined. So like our network technology has evolved to a point where like blockchain technologies and social media technologies, like all this blockchains, whether it's cryptocurrencies or crypto art, it's all built on the substrate of interconnected social communities. And so what that inherently kind of installs this social program that allows artists and collectors to be side by side and not go through those intermediaries that I was speaking about earlier.
I just have one quick one for Dave. Is that also challenging, right? I mean, those are so intertwined and your community is so engaged as the market changes, as your desires and your work and the things you want to do perhaps changes. Does that also become a challenge?
Yeah, so everything is a double-edged sword, you know, and particularly here. So, you know, there's many artists are, I happen to be a fairly social person, and I like to be around people and I like to connect with people and have a lot of conversations. But, you know, artists are usually people that are kind of at the fringes of, you know, or can be people that are at the fringes of culture and don't necessarily want to be like under a microscope all the time. And so it is a huge challenge. And to immerse yourself in the world of social media is to immerse yourself in algorithmic hurricanes that kind of just batter you, and you know, you have to like lash yourself to the mast and be like, you know, this is a compromise I'm going to make so that I can, you know, have a little more of that sovereignty that we seek as crypto artists.
It's not a challenge for me at all. And it's very simple because personally, and I could be wrong and Ray could tell me I'm crazy, I believe this is an art renaissance. And I believe that there's artists that I'm collecting from right now that will be the next Basquiat's and Warhols. So therefore, the fact that I have even that opportunity to even be in a conversation with some of these people, to me, is a very special moment. So I don't really care how the artist feels sometimes. Sorry.
Yeah. Now, my role is really focused on the data of NFTs. And I think that while we talk about how the profile picture movement, people speak very disparagingly of it, and that was the joke, everything else is real. The downturn that we've seen has been across the board. It is, you know, it's been just as much in one-of-one art, it's been just as much in generative art, and obviously people like you, Dave, have been able to buck that trend with incredible innovation. But one of my questions when I look at this, when you're looking at Twitter, the constant refrain is, we'll just wait for the bull to come back. We'll wait for the bull market to come back. And what I'm thinking is, have there been product market fit issues that are being revealed? Do you think there are product market fit issues being revealed here, or do you think things just got frothy and we're deflating?
So I think what happened was there's an extreme over speculation on these assets, like just generally. And the retraction has been really brutal for all asset classes. But again, I just want to be really clear, like NFT technology, blockchain technology is just a technology. These are completely different asset classes, in my opinion. Like the way that we use and experience art is very different from the way that we use and experience collectibles, right? Even with physical objects. And so I don't know that, I'm not discouraged by like this kind of lull or dip. If anything, it puts like a little more fire in me, because I'm like, I believe in this technology so wholeheartedly, because it's like things that, like, I don't know, the fluidity wins, in my opinion. Like, and I mean, like I have collectors that literally like all over the entire globe, and they can instantaneously transact these things. So like my evolutionary like iterations as an artist to evolve my ideas and see how things perform, like that cycle is so much faster that I think it's gonna win no matter what. So I'm like, most of my most successful projects have been dropped in like deep bare conditions. And I really like that. It's like when there's a forest fire, you see what other trees are really there, you know, and like the sunlight hits the forest floor again. And like those are fun times for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. At Proof, you know, like we've had to do a lot more work in this market to really convey why some of the artwork and the artists we're working with are meaningful and important and are the next Basquiat or otherwise. And so that's meant going really deep on storytelling and media and context building. And to your point, Dave, I think ultimately that's incredibly healthy for us to build that muscle as a platform or so-called gallerist in some ways, and then ultimately to bring collectors along for that journey so that those who are here are more sophisticated, thinking more long-term. So I think it's ultimately been healthy, if not brutal, in the short term.
I also, sorry, just really quickly, because it's relevant, but like when we talk about successful artists, if we're talking about like financially successful artists, they all share one thing in common, which is that they master the social and media landscape of their time. So like in the Renaissance, it's like these were artists that were very close to the courts and the court system, and that was the communications networks of like, you know, Italy, right? And then if you think about like the Warhols and stuff, he used screen printing to mass produce these one of X editions, and was a master of the media landscape of the time, which is like newspapers and Hollywood. And so we're in the era of Twitter and social media and Instagram. And even like before Web3 or NFTs, there's a whole generation of artists that are now very successful contemporary artists who became popular on Instagram. Even like our most popular musicians in the world got their start on YouTube: Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber. So just my advice to artists is like, look at the media landscape of your time. Like, where are people paying attention? And like, just know that that's like the substrate in which you have to like sow your seeds. Like, it's really.
I might say some things people don't like, but first of all, Dave was 100% right that we need to separate the idea of digital art and digital objects or goods. You know, my kids spend a lot of money on Robux because they're digital natives, and therefore digital assets is not only going to be something that's important, but it's going to be something that every single person will be using in the future at some point with tokenization of your house, of your car. That's all happening, right? We can't stop that. That's a tsunami that's coming that we cannot stop. On the other hand, the bear market with art, while the more I hear people say that a bull is coming, I usually, that's something to me that's a red flag. So I believe that if you have a good enough product or a good enough art, this idea of onboarding, we need to go get people and convince them. We need to, you know, somehow bring people into your community. It doesn't work that way. You put something out that's good, people will come. And if artists aren't doing or don't have the wherewithal and the strength and the conviction like Dave does and some others, they're not going to survive this sort of time period. But I don't see that as a bear market. That's, to me, it's about, you know, this is a period. Yes, we had this, you know, value of certain things that shouldn't have been there. But if you're going to make something good, people will come. That's just the bottom line. Onboarding is about seeing a good product and people wanting it.
And Benny, what do you? I think with you, a lot of collectors talk about just wanting to be there for the art, but you have investors, right? I mean, you have people who invest their money with you because they want you to generate returns for them. And I'd be curious, when you're looking at artists, when you're observing artists, what is it that you think will make an artist stay relevant for 5 to 10 years so that your investors can get returns by buying their art?
So I think there's just two. I collect art for myself that I collect that I love. And then for my fund, I collect art that has value in the future, 100%, or I can't take their money. I'm using other people's money, not just my own. The answer really is that again, just to go back to what I said, I believe, you know, my whole thing in my fund is I believe that we're in an art renaissance. So I believe that there's people that are going to have value that is not short term but long term. That, you know, not every single artist needs to be in the MoMA, by the way. Not every single artist needs to be in Christie's and Sotheby's. There's, you know, CJ Henry is a very successful artist who is not and never will be in the MoMA, and she doesn't care, right? It's about her putting that good product. So the longevity of an artist really comes down to me is how much effort and conviction are they putting in? How many times are they trying new things? I never have a problem with an artist making a mistake. I don't believe in mistakes. I think they have to keep working at their craft and getting better. And the beauty of the blockchain, and I'll end with this, is that if you look at some of these artists, you could see from them from 2 to 3 years ago to what they're doing now, because it's all immutable on chain. You see how they become tremendous artists over the last 2 years with the skills that they have, because it's a historical record. So to me, that's sort of like how I approach it.
I have a quick answer for this one too, if you don't mind. So I think that I've been thinking a lot about this over the course of my career. And again, like I made my whole living on Instagram for a decade, just like trading views for advertising and basically compromising my artistic integrity to get like some commercial inflow. And I think that when I think about how artists can be successful in these types of landscapes, the root of all value, in my opinion, is community. Money, tokens, whatever you want to call it, is just a medium of exchange by which we move value through space and time. So like if I'm in a early agrarian culture. Like, I have my wheat harvest, but I need eggs. And my wheat is growing, but I still need eggs. So I have a token that moves the value of what I'm growing forward or backward in time so that I can survive and feed my family. If you just keep abstracting that up and up and up and up until the moment we're in now I'm an artist who has like a tribe, a community of people, and there's different tokens that I'm issuing, editions, one of ones, and they all represent a way to move the value I'm creating for my community and people who want to belong to my community through space and time. But the exciting thing about blockchain is it comes with that data layer. It comes with an executable data set that I can, instantaneously reward people who held a certain asset for a certain amount of time. I can go and make an agreement with another community and be like, why don't we exchange value with our tokens through space and time, in creative and innovative ways. We created a contract called Storm Drain where people can bid on other artists' one-of-ones using my tokens, my art tokens. And so basically what I'm doing is like, I'm going to their tribe that they've created and saying, hey, if you have some of my assets, you can get something from your, hero of your tribe. It's just a really interesting way to think about everything that's happening here.
Eli's a hero of my tribe, by the way. I just want you to know that. This guy is amazing. You should all know that.
And Eli, why don't we end with you? What are you seeing as the kind of the change that you've noticed in artists who you work with, in what's important to them? How have those conversations changed over the past 2 years? Because you've been doing shows with the best artists for 2 years now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to Benny's point, which is that the artists who are most highly convicted in themselves, very little has changed. They've maybe been a bit more thoughtful on supply or cadence of releasing work or some of those pricing dynamics, release mechanics, but they are so highly convicted in the thing they're doing and maybe even compelled to create and share work that in many ways, very little has changed with that caliber and with that type of artist.
Yeah, I think I've done a lot of podcasts with artists in the past, and I think the thing that everyone has in common who has been able to find a place in this space has been authenticity to themselves. And it's never really straying from the person that they are and realizing that that person is someone who can be successful in this space. And then I think, Benny said something very interesting, which is just that you have to look for people who are willing to experiment and constantly try new things. And I think that really resonates. And I think that's something that Dave has, because he's our one artist on the stage here, but that Dave's, really has exemplified.
Just quickly, there was a time when you would only be able to paint inside. You had an easel, you would paint inside, right? And there would be landscape artists. And then one day, somebody invented technology where you could take your outside and you could actually paint outside your landscape. And the artists at the time said, that's cheating. And these other artists were like, no, I'm experimenting. And now the greatest artists that we know took their canvases outside because the easel was movable.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to realize.
Yeah, it's the tale as old as time. The camera's cheating, and then Photoshop's cheating, and something's always cheating. But that mentality just gets you drowned out. But thank you guys all. I thought that was really interesting, getting your perspective, and thank you to the team here for letting us come.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the impressive and interesting discussion. 드디어 세 번째 세션을 마무리할 시간이 되었습니다. 시간이 정말 빠르게 흐르고 있는데요. 저희 15분 정도 휴식하고 5시에 다시 뵙도록 하겠습니다.